My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a forensic accountant. I've spent my career sifting through ledgers and bank statements, looking for the quiet lies hidden in plain sight, the kind that can unravel entire companies. But nothing quite prepared me for the day I had to apply those same skills to my own family, to the people who were supposed to protect me. It was a Sunday afternoon, a typical family dinner at my mother's house, and the air was thick with the smell of roast chicken and the unspoken expectation that I would, once again, be the target. My brother, Mark, leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he gestured vaguely at me with his fork, a piece of potato dangling from it. "Sarah here," he announced to our aunts and uncles. "She's so good with numbers, you know. Always so careful. Me, I'm a big picture guy. I take risks. That's why my business is really taking off. Mom's so proud, right?" He winked at my mother, who beamed back, her eyes shining with adoration. Unlike some people, who just crunch numbers in a cubicle all day. The table chuckled. My mother added, "It's true, dear. Mark has such vision. You're just so practical, sometimes you miss the forest for the trees." The heat in my cheeks was immediate, a familiar flush of humiliation. They thought they were so clever, so untouchable. They had no idea what I was holding in my hand, what I'd been seeing in the numbers for months. They had no idea what I was about to reveal. To understand why their words stung so deeply, and why I didn't immediately snap back, you need to understand the dynamic that had been etched into our family since childhood. Mark, 2 years my senior, was always the golden boy. Charming, charismatic, full of grand ideas that rarely materialized but always sounded impressive. My mother, Eleanor, saw him as her adventurous entrepreneur, destined for greatness. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who preferred books and logic to bravado. My aptitude for mathematics, which eventually led me to a career in forensic accounting, was seen not as a strength, but as a lack of imagination, a sign of my overly cautious nature. While Mark's latest venture would be proudly displayed in a silver-framed photo on the mantelpiece, a picture of him shaking hands with some minor local dignitary, or a certificate for most innovative startup from a dubious online organization, my achievements were met with a polite nod and a quick change of subject. That ornate silver frame, always gleaming, always showcasing Mark, became a symbol of everything I wasn't in their eyes. The pattern of Mark's grand schemes and my quiet skepticism began early. When I was 25, just starting my career, Mark launched Mark's Mobile Munchies, a food truck concept. He needed startup capital. My mother, of course, was his first investor, emptying a significant portion of her emergency savings. Mark then came to me, asking for a small loan to cover some unexpected costs. I offered to look at his business plan, something I'd learned to do meticulously in my training. He laughed it off. "It's not rocket science, Sarah. Just good food and good vibes." I saw immediately that his projections were wildly optimistic, his cost estimates laughably low. I tried to gently explain the risks to my mother, showing her the discrepancies, but she waved it away. "You're just jealous, Sarah," she'd said, "you never take risks. Mark needs our support." Mobile Munchies lasted 6 months, then vanished, leaving a trail of unpaid suppliers and my mother's savings significantly depleted. Mark simply shrugged it off as a learning experience. A few years later, when I was 30, Mark announced his next big thing, Synergy Solutions, a digital marketing agency. This time, he wasn't just asking for money, he was offering exclusive investment opportunities to family and friends. He promised a 20% return within a year, backed by a slick presentation he'd clearly paid someone else to make. My mother, still smarting from Mobile Munchies but desperate for Mark to succeed, was hesitant. Mark leaned on her, painting a picture of regret if she missed out on his inevitable success. He even brought a fake testimonial from a satisfied and fictional client. "Think of it, Mom," he'd said, "this is your chance to really set yourself up for retirement." My mother, against my explicit warnings, invested nearly half of her remaining retirement savings. I spent hours trying to show her the flaws in his financial model, pointing out that his projected client acquisition rates were impossible, and his expenses seemed inflated in some areas, suspiciously absent in others. "Sarah, you always find a problem," she'd sighed, brushing me off. "Can't you just be happy for your brother?" That detail mattered later. The returns from Synergy Solutions started strong, for a few months. My mother would proudly show me the small deposits Mark was making into her account. "See, Sarah? You worried for nothing." I looked at the numbers, and something felt off. The deposits were regular, but they didn't quite line up with the promised 20% return on her principal. It was too neat, too consistent, regardless of market fluctuations or actual client growth. That was when the numbers stopped looking accidental. I realized Mark wasn't generating actual profits, he was paying her back with her own money, or money from other unsuspecting investors. A classic Ponzi scheme, albeit a small, family-sized one. I tried to explain this to my mother, but she refused to listen. "You're just trying to tear your brother down," she accused, her voice sharp. "You always have." Then came the real crunch. 6 months before that humiliating dinner, Mark called up a family emergency meeting at Mom's house. Synergy Solutions was facing a temporary liquidity crisis, he explained, blaming a sudden market downturn and unforeseen operational costs. He needed more capital, urgently, to save the company. He looked directly at me, his eyes pleading, then shifting to a subtle challenge. "Sarah, you're so good with finances. You understand how these things work. A small bridge loan, just to tide us over. You have a good nest egg, don't you?" My mother chimed in, "Yes, Sarah. It's family. We have to help each other. Mark's business is so close to success, it would be a tragedy to let it fail now." The pressure was immense. They painted me as the cold, unfeeling sister who hoarded her money while her brilliant brother struggled. I refused, citing my own financial commitments and the instability of his business model. Mark's face hardened, and my mother looked at me with a disappointment so profound it felt like a physical blow. "I expected more from you, Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Family always comes first." That evening, after everyone had left, I stayed behind. My mother was distraught, convinced Mark's business was truly on the brink of collapse because I hadn't stepped in. I watched her pace, her hands twisting nervously. "Mom," I said, "let me just look at his books." "Really look. I can help you understand what's happening." She finally agreed, perhaps out of desperation, handing me a folder of documents Mark had given her. What I didn't understand yet was the true depth of Mark's deception. As I delved into the files, bank statements, invoices, client contracts, the picture that emerged was far worse than I'd imagined. It wasn't just incompetence or a small Ponzi scheme. Mark had been systematically siphoning funds from Synergy Solutions, not just to pay off old investors, but for his personal use. There were luxury car lease payments, extravagant restaurant tabs, and even a down payment on a boat, all disguised as business expenses. He had fabricated invoices for non-existent services and inflated others. He had even used my mother's investment as collateral for a personal line of credit, without her knowledge. The liquidity crisis was a fiction, a smokescreen to cover his embezzlement. He wasn't just failing, he was stealing. The silver-framed picture on the mantelpiece, currently showing Mark receiving a local business leader certificate, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I spent the next few months meticulously gathering evidence. I used my skills as a forensic accountant, but I stayed within ethical and legal bounds. I didn't hack anything or access private records illegally. Instead, I analyzed the documents my mother had given me, cross-referenced them with publicly available business filings, and carefully examined the bank statements she'd shared. I found discrepancies in company registrations, inconsistencies in reported revenue, and a clear pattern of personal expenditures being disguised as business costs. I even found an email exchange between Mark and a vendor for a Synergy Solutions company retreat that was actually a luxury cruise for Mark and his girlfriend. I made copies of everything, organized it into a clear, chronological narrative, and stored it securely. I consulted a trusted colleague, presenting the situation as a hypothetical case study, to ensure my interpretations were sound and my evidence strong. My goal wasn't to destroy Mark, but to protect my mother and ensure he couldn't continue to exploit her. The family dinner, the one where Mark and my mother humiliated me, was the breaking point. It was a week after I had finished compiling my evidence. Mark had called my mother earlier that day, sounding desperate, saying he needed another small infusion of cash to finalize a major deal that would save Synergy Solutions. My mother, despite everything, was wavering. She had called me, asking if I could just reconsider helping Mark. I knew this was my chance. I arrived at her house with a discreet, slim briefcase, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. The roast chicken tasted like ash in my mouth as Mark's smug pronounce. Mens and my mother's fond agreement echoed around the table. Some people, Mark had said, looking pointedly at me, just don't have the stomach for real business. They're too scared to put their money where their mouth is. I took a deep breath, pushing my half-eaten plate away. Actually, Mark, I said, my voice calm, cutting through the general chatter, I have put my money where my mouth is. And my time. I've been looking very closely at Synergy Solutions. The table went quiet. Mark's smirk faltered. My mother looked at me, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. Sarah, not now. We're having dinner. I ignored her. I've compiled a full financial audit of Synergy Solutions, Mark. And it makes for very interesting reading. I reached for my briefcase, pulling out a bound report and a small, portable projector. I think it's time we all understood what's really been happening. I projected a spreadsheet onto the dining room wall, a clear, color-coded breakdown of funds. This, I stated, pointing to a column, is the money my mother invested. And this, I moved to another column, is where that money actually went. I laid out the facts, calmly and methodically. I showed them the fabricated invoices, the personal luxury expenses disguised as business costs, the unauthorized use of my mother's investment as collateral. I showed them the email about the company retreat that was actually Mark's private cruise. Synergy Solutions, I concluded, is not in a liquidity crisis, Mark. It's a front for your personal spending. And you've systematically defrauded Mom, and likely others, of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The room was silent, save for the hum of the projector. Mark's face went from pale to beet red. This is ridiculous, he roared, slamming his fist on the table. She's lying. She's always been jealous. My mother stared at the wall, her face a mask of horror and disbelief, her eyes darting from the numbers to Mark, then to me. Mark, she whispered, is this true? He stammered, denying everything, but the evidence was undeniable, laid out in stark relief. I passed around copies of key documents, bank statements, email printouts, legal definitions of fraud. The payoff was immediate and devastating. Mark launched into a furious tirade, accusing me of betrayal, of trying to ruin him. My mother, initially defensive of Mark, seeing her golden boy exposed, slowly crumpled. The realization of what he had done, and how thoroughly she had been deceived, washed over her. She saw the years of favoritism, the dismissal of my warnings, the public humiliations, all for a son who had stolen from her. The other family members, who had listened in stunned silence, began to murmur. Some had also invested in Mark's schemes. One of my uncles, who had lent Mark a smaller sum for an earlier venture, stood up, his face grim. Is this why you never paid me back, Mark? He asked, his voice shaking. The dinner ended abruptly, with Mark storming out, threatening legal action against me, a hollow threat, given the evidence I possessed. My mother was inconsolable. It took weeks, and the cold, hard advice of a financial advisor I brought in, for her to fully grasp the extent of her losses and Mark's treachery. She ultimately decided to press charges, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for justice and a slim hope of recovering some of her money. Mark was eventually arrested and faced charges of fraud. The family was shattered. Some relatives sided with Mark, believing my mother and I had betrayed him. Others, like my uncle, were grateful for the truth. My relationship with my mother slowly, painfully, began to mend. She started seeing me not as the overly cautious daughter, but as the one who had protected her, even when it meant exposing an ugly truth. The silver picture frame, which had once held Mark's fabricated achievements, now stands empty on the mantelpiece. Sometimes, when I visit, I see her looking at it, not with longing, but with a quiet, reflective sadness. The truth had been devastating, but it had also, finally, set us free.